Hello, and welcome to the live Packaging Impressions and Printing Impressions webinar, One Dozen Myths Around Continuous Feed Inkjet, sponsored by Screen. I'm Linda Casey, Editor-in-Chief of Packaging Impressions, and the host of today's event. Before we get started, let me take a second to point out the resources widget. At the bottom of your console, it looks like an open book. If you missed the Tech Tips video we played leading up to the webinar, you can always click this widget for more information on how to use your console and access other webinar resources, such as today's slides. On the subject of slides, let's advance to the next. Here to discuss the 12 myths around continuous feed inkjet, we have Aron Allenson, Product Manager for High Screen Inkjet for Screen Americas. Due to unforeseen circumstances, our commercial printer speaker is not able to join us. On the plus side, we do get more time with Aron. And that's a treat because Aron has a long history of success in the printing industry. Aron understands that printers of all kinds are facing the challenges of an evolving labor landscape, supply chain issues, and rapid market changes. They're looking for solutions to stay profitable and healthy. Roll-fed inkjet is one possibility. But there are a lot of misconceptions and outright myths about paper, finishing rolls, print quality, and more. Lucky for us, Aron has the background to help break down the myths and uncover the truths. Welcome, Aron. The mic's all yours.
Thank you very much, Linda, for a nice introduction, making me blush. Thank you. Before I get started, I just wanted to encourage anyone who has questions, please feel free to ask them. Also, if you have a question you don't really want to have asked in front of everyone else, at a couple of points I'll put my email address on the screen, and feel free to email me directly. I will do my best to answer all the questions, even if we don't get to them today, or during the webinar, I should say. So without further ado, I will jump into it. You know, really in earnest, roll-fed inkjets hit the market around 2006. It really started primarily in the transactional and direct mail space. It was a lot of the banks and insurance companies that had these big implants that were looking for something more stable than toner systems, which, you know, certainly at that time were challenging to keep up and running. There was some direct mail for the same reasons. Inkjet really worked for those guys because they really only ran on one or two different papers. Their runs were all long runs. They were all very consistent, you know, 1,000,000 8.5 by 11s of basically the same statement over and over again. And really, quality was not their biggest concern. So roll-fed inkjet, that's where it started, and that's why it really worked. You know, it was very straightforward. But come to today, 2022, lots of things have changed. I mean, the world has changed, but also inkjet printers have changed. There's lots of companies that are really taking a hard look at roll-fed inkjet. You know, some of the reasons, these machines are producing offset quality now. Don't take my word for it. You know, look at some of the prints that are coming off some of these machines. You know, it's a competitive response to your own competition. More and more printers are adopting them, which means there's competition against them. Customer demand, more and more customers are starting to see what's possible. There's a never-ending shortage of places for marketers to spend their budget, and so that's causing expansion. We've seen unprecedented just specifically direct mail in the last probably 6-9 months. It's been exploding. It's actually surprising how much it's grown recently. And of course, there's a labor shortage, not news to anyone. And how are you going to grow? So there's There's lots of reasons that lots of companies that really never thought about roll-fed inkjet before are now giving it serious consideration. Um, and with that comes concerns and questions. And the natural thing that happens is when people have questions, they maybe make assumptions, or they're told something, or it's a little bit like the game of telephone where one person says something and the next person repeats it, but a little differently. And so it becomes sort of a myth. And so we wanted to kind of attack those and try to dispel or shine a light, because some of them, frankly, aren't myths. Some of them are true, but maybe in a different way. So let's get right into it. So first myth, print quality just won't be accepted. I worked at commercial printers a good part of my career, 16 years. And so I understand what kind of quality customers are looking for. And what I can tell you is, number one, don't take my word for it. You got to see it for yourself. I can put up any numbers, any pictures you want, unless you see it and decide that the quality meets your customers' needs. That's really the litmus test. But what I will tell you is that most of the inkjet manufacturers have made really long strides in quality compared to what we were producing in 2006, in the early 2000s. Screen really has led that charge. We're doing 1200 DPI with our current ink set. We've got 91% of the PMS colors in the solid book. We're hitting with the delta E of 3 or less. Light stocks, heavy stocks, we're printing up to 12 point. We're holding detail really well. We're holding the highlights. The biggest thing is that, the truth to this is that you're seeing lots of commercial and packaging work being done. These companies are not adopting it because the quality standards have dropped. They're adopting it because now it's meeting their needs. Second myth, stocks are a problem. Actually, right now, that's not a myth at all. Stocks are a problem. But it's not really specific to roll stock. I've heard from many customers that produce both rolls and sheets that they're having challenges in both. The market's not the same as it was. For the longest time, the mills were closing down paper machines because they were trying to get the ratio between supply and demand more in their favor. And they were getting closer and closer. They were kind of edging up on it. And then all of a sudden, a few things happened. I think it was about 3 years ago. We had 2 mills in the U.S. close within a month or two of one another, Westland and Appleton. That caused a big shock to the industry. Even though they weren't as big as some of the other mills, that percent changed caused a ripple. And then, of course, we have all the supply chain issues that have gone way beyond paper that we're all dealing with right now. Add those together, and paper really is a challenge. But it's not the death of printing. It's not like, okay, we have this paper challenge and printing is going to go away because of it. Printing is still happening. It's still being done every single day. It may seem like it affects this paper problem, if you will. I don't know if that's the right term, but this challenge is affecting rolls more than it does sheeted stock, because rolls have always taken more planning. Even in the best of times, if you wanted roll paper, you couldn't just call up your merchant and ask them if they could deliver it the next morning. Whereas, with sheeted goods, we could call up our merchant, and even if we were in a bind, we could say, could we send a truck over and get it? If they could accommodate us, they would. That's never happened with roll stock. So it's always taken more planning. And I think one of the other things that makes this stocks are a problem myth, or truth in a way, seem like it's real, is that I would say up until about 3 years ago, if you wanted to print with inkjet on coated papers, you needed an inkjet treatment. You needed a pre-treatment. And there weren't that many stocks. And so if you have a small percent of stocks that are available, and now there's a crunch on paper. It might seem like those are even less available. The fact is that certainly screen no longer has this requirement. And so you can put almost any roll paper on one of our machines and we're able to print with it. So that's the stocks are a problem myth. I don't know if that's the right word, but anyway. Oh, excuse me. I will say with planning, this can be accomplished. And as the supply chain eases, this will get easier. It's not going to stay like this, right? I think we all know that. We don't know when. If you have an idea of when, please email me because I would love to know. But I think we're all waiting for this thing to ease up, and it will get there. Inkjet inks are too expensive. I hear this all the time. And the fact is they are expensive. But I'll say two things. One is it's not about the per liter cost or the per kilogram cost. I know one of our competitors sells ink by the kilogram. We sell it by the liter. It's more about the yield. So what do you get for that? Think of it as a gallon of gas. If you got, if you paid $3 a gallon and you got 20 miles to the gallon, or you could buy this other gas that was $4 a gallon, but you got 30 miles to the gallon, the $4 a gallon gas might seem better. Besides that, it's one of many costs that go into the total cost of production, right? You have capital equipment, you have paper, you have the ink, you have labor, there's all kinds of other things. There's finishing that go into it. My point is that as a whole, right? And that's really what it's about. The inks are expensive, but it's not stopping lots of companies who are producing with inkjet because it's not a obstructionist cost. It's a cost that gets factored in, but it doesn't prevent it from someone making money with the process. Okay. And the real question is, does it ROI? Can you make money with it? And the short answer is yes, because if the answer was no, we wouldn't be making the machines because people wouldn't be buying the machines, and we've had a lot of interest, right? All I would say is that the devil is in the details. You have to do your due diligence, right? This is a complex piece of equipment, complex process. You have to do your due diligence, understand the cost, and then determine if this is something that's going to be good for your business. But don't make your decision just because you think the per liter price of ink is too high. Next myth is that we don't have enough volume to justify roll-fed inkjet. And I don't know the answer. It's different for every single company. But I will say that the threshold might be lower than you thought. It certainly has come down significantly. There was a point where you really needed several million feet of paper a month for it to make sense. But that's changed. It's really reduced quite a bit. We have many companies that are commercial printers that have decided to purchase roll-fed inkjet, and very few have the work to fill it up right off the bat. They may have enough to cover some percentage of those costs so that they are not just taking a leap of faith, but they're looking at it from an intelligent and entrepreneurial perspective to see if it's something that's good for their company, right? And there's a lot of, and part of that is what is the added value that inkjet brings to their company, right? It's quicker time to market. There's fewer steps in the process. There's higher productivity rates. You need less people to run this machine. You can do color variable. If you do color variable with toner, it's pretty expensive per piece cost, whereas that isn't the case with roll-fed inkjet. And it allows you for late stage changes, which is really beneficial to a lot of customers. We do have a customer that put in roll-fed inkjet. They figured out their budgeted hourly rate and basically went to market with it. And they found that customers thought there was so much value in the time reduction it took from the time their job got into the shop to the time the company was able to produce it, that they actually raised their VHR significantly in order to balance the work across their other machines. That machine is still busy, right? They're still keeping it running. They're just making a lot more money with it than they were. Now, I've gotten through a few of the myths, and I thought it might be good, rather than ask for questions all at the end, does anyone have any questions? I would be happy to try to answer them. And as I said at the beginning, here's my email address. If you feel more comfortable just emailing me your question, I'm happy to try to answer it that way as well.
Aron, we've been lucky. We have some brave souls who have submitted questions. If you want to submit your questions, just as a reminder to the audience, as a tip for the audience, you can do it through the webinar consoles. You can just send in your questions by writing them in for the Q&A module, and they'll come to Aron and myself. So the first question we have comes from Jonathan Adam. And Jonathan Adam is actually referring to the first myth in the presentation. And he asks, can the output of an inkjet web press replace or take the place of our offset sheet fed work? Jonathan Adam continues to explain that he looked at a digital press from another manufacturer, and the quality doesn't appear to meet the needs for color critical work. It meets the needs for one-to-one pharma work, but not color critical work.
Okay. So the short answer is you are the only person able to determine what meets your quality needs. You have to look at it. I can say, oh, of course, but at the end of the day, you have to make your own determination. I will say that not every printer prints the same. Even printers that are maybe look similar, there's so much that goes into that quality question. There's ink, there's how you fire the heads, how you do the color management, how you rip the file, what screening are you using. These are not necessarily questions that an operator has to answer. What I'm saying is these are questions or items that differentiate one printer manufacturer from another. We have several commercial printers that are using our printers for commercial work, and we have several direct mail customers who are using our printers for self-mailers on high-gloss paper, which obviously requires a certain level of quality, what I would say is offset quality. So I would just encourage you, if you don't mind, reach out to a screen salesperson. I can connect you with one if that would help, and they can show you some samples. You can make your own determination. At the end of the day, it's got to meet your standards.
Fantastic, Aron. And we have one more question for this first break. And this question is from Stan. How successfully has roll-fed inkjet resolved the side guide gripper edge uniformity that has plagued earlier machines?
So side guide gripper uniform, I'm not 100% sure I'm answering your uniformity question, but I'm going to take those separately. So side guide, so for screen, we guide off the same edge of the web for both the front and the back, meaning printer one guides to the operator side, then we go through a turn bar, and then we guide to the gear side. So if you actually were to look inside our printers, you'd see with the paper in it, you'd see in printer one, the paper is all the way to the edge of the operator side, and in printer two, it's all the way to the edge of the gear side. I call it the gear side because I'm an old printer. There's technically isn't gears like that in the printer, but I think you know what I mean. Uniformity has a specific meaning. The word uniformity has a specific meaning in inkjet. So you have inkjet heads that go across the print width, if you will, and those have to be stitched together so that if you print like a solid bar going all the way across, or an image that spans head boundaries, you need the image or that bar to look the same as it goes from head to head to head to head all the way across. Getting those heads to look exactly right is what we would call uniformity, or exactly the same might be a better way to say it. We call that uniformity. Alignment is a similar term, but a little different. That has to do with the not having a stair-stepping effect, if you will, going across. They kind of go hand in hand. So that's just part of a paper setup. For screen, I can't speak to the other printer manufacturers. For screen, when you set up a new paper, you go through that process, that uniformity and alignment process. Once you've done it once, you really don't have to do it again. Additionally, we have tools that come with our printer, including a very high-end scanner that when you run the paper through for your setup, it looks for that uniformity and it sets you like 98% of the way there without a human having to do anything. So hopefully I answered your question.
Fantastic, Aron. Do we have a little bit more time for 2 more questions, perhaps, from Jeff and Chris? I know we've got a lot coming in.
I'm here to answer questions,
Chris,
so please.
Great. So Chris's question is, the software in the TruePress 520 HD has advanced very quickly and dramatically in the last 2 years in terms of expanding the color gamut, better registration, etc. What's next?
Oh, well, I mean, no disrespect at all, but the workflow we use is called Equios, and it has been around as Equios since 2011. Prior to that, it was TrueFlow, which is probably the most widely installed workflow out there. So it's been around for a long time. You might be referring to our introduction of something we call AIA, which is a new form of color management. It's a screen built. We're called screen because our first product was a halftone screen, so we've kind of been doing this a while. This is in 1940, by the way, not a few years ago. So what's next? We continue to improve Equios. So there's actually a new version that was just released. It has things like it allows the printer to come. So let's say you're changing a roll, which means the printer is not printing for a few minutes. If the job you were running was, let's say, a 60-pound offset, and now the next job is, let's say, a 9-point gloss, you need the heaters to come up to temperature. Well, the new Equios, it actually has the knowledge that what's the next paper, and so it starts the heaters warming up before you actually tell it to start warming up. So it's more productivity. The screening is a little different. We have some other things coming out that are related to Equios that I can't say at the moment because they're not released yet. But we're very excited about those. Our imposition is pretty mature at this point. So Equios it's a lot of smaller features. I would say one thing is we have an improved communication with the finishing. So if you were to look at how most inkjet printers communicate with finishing is through something called the Type 1 interface, and it's really a simple interface. It's like, here's the speed I'm running at, here I'm stopping, here I'm starting. There's not a lot to it, but the new Equios has more advanced communication, including record level information. So, that's a new thing that's coming out. So,
fantastic, Aron. And we also have the question from Jeff. So Jeff is asking, and I know we are going to be talking about ink later on in the presentation, but Jeff is very eager to talk about ink, and he asks, are you required to buy ink from the OEM, or are there aftermarket inks? Does using an aftermarket ink void any warranties?
So we can't require you to buy ink, but we do void the warranty if you buy someone else's ink. Why? Because screen, I think we might be the only manufacturer who does this. We actually cover our inkjet heads under our service contract. So when you're on a service contract, if a head goes bad, we replace it and there's no additional cost to you, right? So if you were using someone else's ink and that ink caused a head failure, it wouldn't be very fair to ask Screen to pay for that when someone else's ink was the cause of that. The other thing I'll say is the ink head what we call waveform and screening are so finely tuned to one another to get the quality that we get. It's not a simple thing just to take one ink out and put another ink in. You know, it just doesn't work that way, at least with our equipment. So the answer is you can do it, but there's a cost associated with you doing it. We have not had any customers really try that for our HD. For our older model machines, we did have a few customers try that, and they went at their own risk, and some of them, you know, probably wish they hadn't. So I'd be
Thanks,
happy
Aron.
to talk more with you about that. I'm sorry to interrupt. I should say I'd be happy to talk more with you about that. You know, just email me and we can connect on the phone.
Fantastic. I love how you're really open and you're encouraging people to reach out to you, Aron. So this is great. And keep those keep those questions coming in. So Aron, I'll let you go back to your presentation, and we'll continue to break for questions because Aron has so kindly and generously suggested that we have frequent question and answer breaks. So we'll be back.
So prior to joining Screen, with the exception of one, every company I worked for was strictly sheet fed. I did work for one printer who had both sheet fed and web presses. So I completely understand what it's like to walk in on a shop floor and you have just tons of different bindery equipment and it's all sheet fed based. That's a big investment, not only in the equipment, but also in the people's knowledge that to run it. Machines can certainly be joined together to the finished product, maybe a more complex or multi-step finished product. But I will say that every company that prints on rolls eventually does turn them into sheets. I can't think of any products where, you know, the thing that the end customer gets is a roll of paper. You know, maybe a poster rolled up in a tube, but let's face it, once you unroll it, it's a sheet. Once you get a roll into sheeted form, there is no reason why you couldn't use your existing bindery equipment that's all sheet fed based. This is a pretty common way for a lot of our customers to start. We see that frequently where they'll just put a simple sheeting system either on their floor or some do it in line. Primarily, it's offline or what some people term nearline. I think those are semantics between the two terms, but they'll sheet it and then they'll then take those sheets to their existing bindery equipment. Relying on one printer is too risky, is the myth, right? You know, business is about managing risk, not ignoring it. I'm not asking you to be this guy, right? We're not asking you to throw away all sense and just say, go for it. You know, the majority of companies that bought roll-fed printers, whether they're direct mail or transactional or commercial printers, more so true with commercial printers, is they didn't start off with multiple systems. They bought one system, right? And the reason this can work, or one of the reasons this can work, is because inkjet systems are way more reliable. They just don't break nearly as often. The downtime is very much planned. The preventive maintenance keeps them running. And I will say Screen, I can't speak to our competitors, but Screen has many remote tools that let us get customers who call and have an issue able to produce 80% of the time. And so the time that they're actually down is very, very small. And I'll say one other thing. We have probably the best group of field engineers that you'll find in our industry. The number of years of experience that our field engineers have is second to none. Screen, the service group is actually a great place to work And so we've been fortunate that we've got some of the best field engineers in the country. We've had many of the field engineers from our competitors leave them to come work for us just because of some of the situations that we have for our field engineers. And I will say that we don't have any field engineers that work on something other than our equipment. So in other words, someone's not going to show up and look at your printer. It's not going to be a warm body and start asking you questions about specific things. Every one of our field engineers are specialists. They're expert at fixing the equipment that we've sold you, right? So when they get there, they're the ones who are working on it. Offset pressmen won't accept inkjet. I honestly wish, not that we have bad customer operators, but I love it when a customer says, hey, I was going to take this guy off my Heidelberg and make him the operator. I love it because those are great operators. They understand paper, they understand color, they're conscientious about the work they do. They want to produce, right? And, you know, even though it's a digital equipment, this is a serious production piece of equipment, right? A 520 HD can do all of these things. It can print over 1 million two-sided letters per day, right? It can print over 65,000 signatures per day. It can do over 1 million self-mailers in a day. That's production, right? This machine is not a toy. Offset press operators like running our printers, right? So we've had many offset pressmen become inkjet press operators. I've asked them, you know, what do you miss it? Do you want to go back? I've never had someone say, oh yeah, I want to go back to an offset press. I ask them why. I have a variety of answers. You know, they don't miss getting ink all over their hands and having to scrub their hands at the end of every day. They like operating from the console. They like the consistency. There's just a variety of reasons, but offset pressmen actually really like our equipment. And like I said in the previous slide, they really want to produce, and our machines produce. You can get a lot of work done with our machine, have a sense of accomplishment. Handling roll stock is a big problem. You know, handling roll stock is different from handling sheeted stock, but it's not like night and day. There are, you know, they're both, at the end of the day, they're both paper. There are some differences. The main things to be concerned about is how it's shipped and stored, and then how it's moved around the shop before and after printing. And those are a little different for each, right? So how it's shipped and how it's stored. You hear two kind of terms for how roll paper can be. One is upright, or some people call it rolling position, which is like this. Let's see here. I think I can draw a line, which is like this, right? Bad line. Or what people commonly call poker chip, and if you can imagine here, like a stack of poker chips, or some people call it flat. And you can see just from this picture, you can store, especially if you have high ceilings, a lot more paper if you store a poker chip, right? And that goes for trucking as well. You can put a lot more paper in a truck if you put it in poker chip than if you store it upright or rolling position, right? Because when it's rolling position, it needs to be on a pallet. And usually they strap two rolls together. And that's for some OSHA thing with ratio height to base or height to width or something. So it is less expensive because of those stacks. It's less expensive to ship and store in poker chip, but it does require clamp chuck or some type of roll turner. You can get poker chip delivered on a pallet, but if you do, then you have to pay for the pallet, right? The paper companies or the merchants that are delivering the paper to your dock are going to charge for that pallet. But if you do get it, then you can move it around with a fork truck. You still have the requirement to turn it upright. If it's upright, as I said a moment ago, it has to be shipped on a pallet. There's like these little cardboard chucks that go on both ends. There's some strapping that goes through the core. it actually takes a decent amount of work to get it on the pallet and get it ready to be shipped on a truck, because the truck, of course, is going on bouncy roads. It's making turns, so it has to be secured. The last thing you want is to get a roll that's damaged. You get a roll with a crushed core, you might as well not have gotten the roll at all. It's not going to help you. You can't run it. But once they're in the upright position, you can move around the shop with your hand. If you notice, there's like almost like a craft paper. This is actually a really thick multi-layer paper. Once it's in this position, you can move it around the shop really and not worry about damaging it. You can roll it with one hand. So while it's still wrapped, once it's printed though, you do not want to move it by hand, because you'll damage whatever printing has been done, because it no longer has that tough craft paper multi-layer outer wrap, right? It'll just be a roll of paper. And so you're gonna want to move it around. This is what a clamp truck looks like. Oh, my animations are not working. Are they? There it goes. My apologies. I think it's because I still have that red pen thing. You can get dollies that look like this, right? And so when you're pulling the paper off the rewind, the dolly goes underneath it. It's kind of V-shaped, so it sits in there and you can move it around. Most companies have a bunch of these things. Some of the finishing line companies make these roll trucks that look like this, right? It's also got a V shape in the bottom, so the roll doesn't roll off of it. But you can move this thing right into, from a rewinder into an unwinder of whatever the next process is. And then one of the other things that I recommend to a lot of customers is there's this company called Stratus that makes these V-shaped pallets. And you can get them in different widths. You get a width that fits inside your roll stand. And so you just pull these things into the roll stand, you lower the roll on it, and then one of your regular fork trucks can move these things around, right? So those are really convenient. I'm going to pause here where I think we're through 8 myths. We got 4 more to go. Any other questions?
Yeah, Aron, our audience is very interested, and they continue to send in the questions. So our next question is from Jim, and Jim asks, does Screen advocate post-coating for direct mail applications with current inks on coated offset stocks?
Good question. I'll say you can if you want. Let me say it like this. If you have a process, Screen does not, but if you have an inkjet printing process where when you print on coated stocks, you need to put down an inkjet treatment, post-coating can be challenging. And the reason is that inkjet treatment causes the water component of the ink to wick away from the surface. Well, it also causes the water component of the pretreatment to wick away, which can cause mottling and challenges in how that coating is supposed to look. Screen uses a highly engineered ink called SC ink, and we do not require pretreatment. So you can run on a regular off-the-shelf Opus or Somerset or Influence or Electa or Sterling or any of a dozen other coated stocks like Westrock, or I can naming all the ones I can think of off the top of my head, but that doesn't mean the ones I'm not naming we can't run. I'm just not thinking of them. Anyway, when we print on those, you absolutely 100%, you can post-coat, you can do aqueous, you can do UV, you can do special effect like a soft touch or any of the other cool coatings that are available, but you don't have to. And I would say of our customers that print coated stock, like self-mailers, that go right in the mail, almost all do not post-coat. So very few post-coat. And the ones that do post-coat only post-coat because a specific customer asked for it. They wanted that high gloss look that a UV coating can provide. It really isn't for the scuffing protection that's added for the post-coat, because our inks are very, very tough. We actually have a study, a third-party company basically ran it through some of our stock through a scuffing system that measures it. I'm not an expert in that, but we have the results of their test. We can provide those to you. So hopefully I answered that question.
Fantastic, Aron. And we have another question from Chris. So Chris asks, will the refresh bar continue to be required into the future?
Also a good question. So the reason, I'm going to explain what Chris, I think, is asking so other people understand. So inkjet heads are made of thousands of tiny nozzles. The nozzles jet the ink, and when a drop is required, and when it isn't required, they don't jet the ink, and the ink has to be fast drying. So imagine your toothpaste tube leaving the cap off. If you leave it off too long, the toothpaste at the end of it is going to start to harden, maybe scab over a little bit. For a toothpaste tube, it's no big deal because you just squeeze a little harder and it comes out. But inkjet heads don't work like that. Once a nozzle clogs, it doesn't automatically unclog, right? There's ways to unclog it, of course, but it can cause print, clogged nozzle can cause print degradation, or what we call a deviated jet or a clogged jet. And so the solution to that is to keep the orifices moist. And the way you do that is you print what some people call a refresh bar, or some people call it a spit line. We call it a flushing line, or just flushing. And so every nozzle fires at, no matter what, at some rate, right? And a lot of times that appears as a bar going straight across the web of CMYK bars. There's also something called the star pattern. Some people don't love that because it has a tendency to make the paper look dirty, but some customers are totally fine with that. And if you use the star pattern, you may not need to use the flushing line or the spit bar, flushing bar. There's a bunch of names for it. Now, you asked about the future. I don't know the future. I know that nobody likes the flushing line. You're not alone asking this question. I don't like the flushing line either. I love to snap my fingers and get rid of it. So I know it's being worked on, but I don't know the answer. I can't predict the future. So I hope I answered your question.
Wonderful, Aron. And our next question kind of goes back to our discussion about the roll-fed aspect. So it comes from Brett. And Brett asks, please discuss advantages and disadvantages of running roll-to-roll versus roll-to-sheet.
Oh, good question. Okay. I'm going to try to be concise, but I will be more than happy to get on the phone with you and answer this at any detail you want. Okay, so when you run roll-to-roll, you have very little setup or change in setup to go from like a 60-pound to a 9-point. Let's just paint a little scenario. We're going to print, first job 1 is 60-pound, 8.5 by 11 letters, and job 2 is on a 9-point gloss that, let's say, is running 6 by 18 and is going to fold, right? And we're going to run them 3 up, okay? So running roll to roll, none of that really matters. It's really just a slight tension adjustment, which is automatic because when you set those papers up, you're saying what paper and you're defining the tension. And so when you switch, all that stuff happens automatically. Like, just to give you an example, when we switch the printer over, there's next to 0 time. It's like 3 or 4 button, clicks on the screen, and that's it, right? And the printer is completely switched over. But let's say you have an inline finishing line, right? And let's say it's a simple one, right? You're just doing cut and stack. You're printing 60-pound offset, so you have your tensions inside the cut and stack line are set one way, and the thickness is set a certain way, and the knife is dropping a certain way, and your slitter wheels are set up for a 2-up scenario, and everything else. And there's a bunch of little settings there. Those systems, by the way, I'm not trying to count them as difficult. They're very automated themselves, but you do have setup time and you do have time to get them running just right. Because, as you know, if you're a printer, paper is really a living thing. You could have, you could run a Electa, 9-point gloss in July, and then run that same paper in January, and it's not going to handle the same way when it gets in the sheets. When it's in roll, the difference is so minimal, it almost doesn't matter, because you're not hitting headstops, you're not, you don't have 1,000 individual sheets, you just have one roll that you keep pulling through, right? But once those things are sheets, they become a lot tougher to handle. I mean, when a 9-point drops onto that stacker, it drops with a lot more definition than a 60-pound or a lighter paper kind of floats down. So all those things mean it takes longer to set up that finishing line. Well, that time you spend setting up that finishing line is time you're not printing. And so that $1 million+ printer is sitting idle while you're setting up the finishing line, right? And the other thing is, if the finishing line goes down, the printer is down, right? Because they're connected. If the printer is down, the finishing line is down. Now, let me just finish answering your question. What we do, what happens is there's some scenarios where it makes sense for certain jobs to run inline. Let's say you need 100% verification of mailing. And for that, you want as few disparate processes as possible. Or let's say you have a lot of 60-pound offset work, and then you have some work that's other than that, right? So there's ways you can set it up where you maybe put an additional turn bar in. And so after the second printer, because you have printer 1 prints one side of the web and printer 2 prints the other side, after printer 2, for some jobs you go into a finishing line, and other jobs you turn and go into a rewinder. And so you can potentially have the best of both worlds. It does increase the investment, but it's not a huge amount. And our people, and I certainly would, our people would be more than happy to go over pros and cons and what that would look like.
Fantastic, Aron. And we have one more question. And this is great. We're getting a great number of questions, but I know that we only have about 12 minutes left in the hour. So please make sure you get your questions in early. So Jeffrey asks, I have heard that mill splices can cause inkjet head damage. Are there any safety measures to help prevent this? Does screen cover the heads if a splice caused damage to the head?
I am so glad you're asking, because that means you know what a splicer is. Or maybe you're thinking of mill splices. Either way, same thing. So mill splices are a little different because those can appear mid-roll. And most of the time they're marked. Not always, but if the mill is doing what they're supposed to do, they're marking the mill splices. And we prefer you to basically inch those through. If your operator does not notice the mill splice and it runs through and it hits the heads, hopefully it doesn't damage the heads. If it does, keep in mind, I mentioned earlier in the call that we cover heads under our service agreement. We don't want it to happen. Obviously, these heads are expensive, so let's try not to let it happen. But if it does, you don't have to worry too much. We're going to replace your head or do what needs to be done. Roll splices, so going from roll 1 to roll 2 is a little different. I don't know if you were thinking of this or if you're thinking of mill splices, but with roll splices, most inkjet printer owners put single roll stands at the front of their presses. But there are some that put zero-speed splicers or turret splicers at the front, more commonly zero-speed. And we have some controls and some systems that communicate, depends on the manufacturer and the model of the splicer, the unwinder, but we have some systems where they can communicate directly with the unwinder. And actually when a splice is made, we pause printing, we trigger the splice to be made. We automatically inch the splice through at speed, and then we automatically start printing again without operator interventions. The operator could be, doing something else while this is going on. So we do get the heads out of the way, but it's automated. So there's very little downtime and no human intervention. Again, it's specific to there's a few different splicing, zero-speed splicers or unwinder manufacturers that we work with already, and we're certainly open to talking with others. So, sounds like for time purposes, I'm going to get going. So I need a lot of work to make this make sense, right? So you're buying this beast, right? You're buying this big machine, and how much work do I need to really cover the costs? And it's really all about the ROI, understanding the costs, what work makes sense. I have known at other companies, salespeople that just would say, do you move all your work over? Because for them, it doesn't matter. The work that you move over has to make sense to move over. It has to make sense to you, not to me, actually. But we can help you determine what work does make sense, not by looking at it and say, yeah, we like that, no, we don't like that, but by running work for you and reporting back on the ink usage and the paper usage and what it actually costs to do that job on one process versus another, which allows you to make intelligent business decisions, right? And of course, there's new business opportunities that come with owning one of these machines. And there's other ways that roll-fed inkjet impacts your business, right? It's different for every single business. There's no the number is 7 or whatever. It doesn't work the same for every company. Every company is different. They have a different mix of work. They have different other equipment in the shop that's going to factor in. The way to figure this out, though, is to determine your BHR, your budgeted hourly rate that has to do with, CapEx and your other fixed costs, building, people, electricity, all that stuff will go into your BHR. We can make it as comprehensive as you want. And we do this for pretty much every customer. You need to think about what's your desired profit margin. I think I mentioned before, we had a customer that started at one level of profit and actually increased it significantly because they were getting unbalanced workload for work that could be produced on multiple different machines. Customers were asking for it to go on their inkjet printer because of the convenience factor. And then also, of course, you'll see what that looks like. What does that look like if we're running one shift? What does it look like if we're running 2 shifts, if we're running 3 shifts? And then you can start to see where the numbers need to be for it to make sense for you. Going through this exercise is your due diligence. It's how it's going to help you make an informed decision, right? There's a lot to it, but I can tell you I've done it for a lot of companies, and forget about one shift. You really need a shift and a half worth of work to make this make sense. If you're running 2 shifts, you can definitely make it make sense, right? But this is just really a rule of thumb, as I wrote back in the napkin, kind of a, indicator. The way to do it is to actually work through the numbers, right? And I'll say one other thing about the numbers. It's very important. Whatever numbers you come up with during the pre-sale, you need to make sure, whether it's us, whether it's Screen, or one of our competitors, you must make us commit to those numbers, right? You can't have us run numbers and say it's 4 during the pre-sale, and then we install it and it's 9, and you say you can't. You're going to be left holding the bag. It has to be 4 post-sale also. The color isn't there yet. When I started in inkjet about 10 years ago, someone asked before about ink. One of the things I did for Screen is I investigated third-party inks, right? And I met with this guy, extremely successful ink manufacturer. I'm not going to say the name of his company, but I would be surprised if everyone on the call didn't know of them. Really good guy, making ink for a long time. And he said, it's just colored water. I don't know what the big deal is. Now, of course, he was downplaying it a little, but that stuck with me. And that's what inkjet ink was back then. But it's very, very different now. It's come a long way. The ink that Screen uses and sells to our customers is a highly, highly engineered ink. It takes us years to refine it and bring it to market, not because of all the marketing we do, because we do them so little. It's because of all the science and the technology and the testing. If we're going to guarantee these heads, this ink has to work, right? And it has to do the quality that you need. What's the point of producing ink that doesn't do good quality, right? So highly engineered ink. Don't take my word for it as far as the color goes. I'll say the same thing I said before. You have to be the judge, but this company, IT Labs, also known as Technology Watch, or the publication they produce is called Technology Watch. You guys have probably seen it. They had us run a roll on a gloss stock, and we ran it with, you can see it, them holding it here, half the images were printed with 520 HD. Then they sheeted it, and then they ran it through a Heidelberg. And this is actually what it looked like side by side, right? And what you're looking at here is not a PDF where I did a screenshot of the PDF. I actually took print and I scanned it. And so you see what the color, by the same scanner, and you can see very little difference. Again, you got to see it for yourself. You got to hold this paper and see it side by side. But, it's pretty darn good. Right? And I'll just say one other thing about that last slide. That was probably 2 years ago that we did that. We've improved even since then, right? Someone asked about Equios. One of the things that's constantly improving about Equios is our color. Oh, I think I forgot to mention one of the things with this new version is gamut input profile. So that's another thing. Next myth, roll fed isn't good for short run. Guess what? It's not, right? When you want to change a roll from one stock to another, it takes 10 or 12 minutes, right? If you have a splicer, you can cut that down to about 4 or 5 minutes because you can get roll 2 ready to go while roll 1 is running. And the splice happens much quicker because it's done by the machine. But it's not a small thing. But if you gang jobs, if you put them together, like we've all done many times on litho, most of the time when we're ganging, we're doing a lot of versions, so it wouldn't be like different sizes like I'm showing here, right? But you'll have different positions, and you run to a common number where you get the minimum you need for one of these positions. What happens, though, is you get overs for all the other positions, or many of the other positions, unless you got real lucky with the numbers, which never seemed to happen to us. But anyway, it was a better way to run than have a different set of plates for all 5 of these runs, right? So I will tell you, a roll-fed inkjet press is way, way, way better at ganging than a litho press could ever be, because you don't have to put all the positions up on the same sheet. You can actually put them back to back as if they're different jobs because it's a digital machine. There's no plates to burn, right? So you can just run continuously, have separator sheets like we have right here, right? And then you run the exact quantity you need. You don't need to run overs. Each job gets its own imposition. You're not doing some funky Dutch cut imposition. I said you get the exact quantity. You can run in any order you need. If you want to run position D first, you can do that, right? The inkjet printer doesn't really care, right? If you need to run, 1,000, it's a 10,000 run, but they want 1,000 office copies, you can do that because you're not going back on press, not in the sense that you have to clean plates and then mount them again. So inkjet press is really good at combining a bunch of small runs. If there's lots of versions, no problem. You can do something I call upstream commingling. So if this is a job that's going to be mailed and it's not geography that drives the version, let's say it's some other demographic, then you can mix your versions up ahead of time, and then you have fewer postal sorts, and you could potentially have higher density into a zip code, which is going to reduce your postage cost. The 12th myth: a wide range of stocks is needed to please our customers. So I spent most of my career in commercial printing, in and around it. I've worked for a lot of different commercial printers. And I would have completely agreed with you. Customers want what they want. Sometimes you get a customer that says, I want a 60-pound offset, and they don't really care whether it's a Domtar or a Finch or an IP or their new name is Silvano. They don't really care. They just want a 60-pound offset. But sometimes a customer says, no, I want it on sterling, right? Specifically sterling. They might have a paper buying program, or they maybe have reasons why they want that, or that's just the name that the last job ran on. That was the paper, and so they want it again. Guess what? For them and for us, the world has changed, right? We all have supply chain challenges. I have customers that said their customer wanted it on a 60-pound. The only thing they could get was an 80. The customer said, fine. Because they called around, they found that no one else could get a 60-pound either. So we're all in it. We're all facing it together. We all have the same challenges. I talk to colleagues at paper mills and merchants every week, and they have the same challenges. They would love to snap their fingers and alleviate all this, but they don't have that power right now either. And customers have experienced that. The customers who are used to getting exactly what they wanted have gotten comfortable with something that's pretty close. It's challenging. I'm not trying to diminish it, but it's the world we're in right now. It will ease up. I'm trying to remember the mill. There is a mill that was saying they're restarting one of their paper machines that they had shuttered. They're restarting it sometime this month. So hopefully that adds some capacity into the market, or some supply, which should, balance out the demand a little bit. So, it's challenging. I kind of cover this, but these paper buying programs, they'll come back. Merchants will start offering stocking programs again. Right now, stock is tough. It's tough, but it'll come back. That's the end of my presentation, but if there are questions, I'm more than happy to answer. And I put my email address. If you want to email me directly, more than happy to get on the phone or just answer you via email, whatever is better for you. I'm happy to try to help.
And the audience, you guys have been great. So Anaya, Peter, Robert, Charlie, Byron, and forgive me if I don't say your name, but we've got all your questions here. Aron has made it very clear that it's very important to him personally, as well as professionally, to answer these questions. So we'll make sure to get your questions over to Aron. But it does look like we're out of time for today. So on behalf of Packaging Impressions, Printing Impressions, and Screen, I want to thank you for attending today's webinar. Be sure to check out our webinar page to get information on all of our archived and upcoming webinars. If you come to a lot of our webinars, you see that Aron is a frequent speaker. So definitely check out those upcoming webinars to see more Aron. If you would like to take just a minute to fill out the brief feedback survey that will appear on your screen next, we would be grateful. Your feedback will influence the webinars we bring to you in the future, and we'll see you at the next Packaging Impressions and Printing Impressions webinar. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. Have a good day.